127. The Deck. The coffin laid upon two line tubs between the vice bench and the open hatchway. The carpenter caulking its seams, the stream of twisted oakum slowly unwinding from a large roll of it placed in the bosom of his frock. Ahab comes slowly from the cabin gangway and hears Pip following him. "Back, lad, I'll be with ye again presently." He goes. Not this hand complies with my humor more genially than that boy. Middle aisle of a church. What's here? "Life buoy, sir. Mr. Starbuck's orders." "Oh, sir, beware the hatchway." "Thank ye, man." The coffin lies handy to the vault. "Sir, the hatchway?" "Oh, sir, it does, sir, so it does." "Art thou not the leg maker? Look, did not this stump come from thy shop?" "I believe it did, sir." "Does the ferrule stand, sir?" "Well enough, but thou art not also the undertaker?" "Aye, sir, I patched this thing up here as a coffin for Queequeg, but they've set me now to turning it into something else." "Tell me, art thou not an errant, all-grasping, intermeddling, monopolizing, heathenish old scamp, to be one day making legs and the next day coffins to clap them in, and yet again life buoys out of those same coffins? Thou art as unprincipled as the gods and as much of a jack of all trades." "But I do not mean anything, sir. I do as I do." "The gods again! Hark ye, dost thou ever sing working about a coffin? The Titans, they say, hummed snatches while chipping out the craters for volcanoes, and the gravedigger in the play sings, spade in hand. Dost thou never?" "Sing, sir? Do I sing? Oh, I'm indifferent enough, sir, for that. But the reason why the gravedigger made music must have been because there was none in the spade, sir. But the caulking mallet is full of it. Hark to it." "Aye, and that's because the lid there's a sounding board, and what's all things make the sounding board is this: there's naught beneath, and yet a coffin with a body in it rings pretty much the same, carpenter. Hast thou ever carried a bier and heard the coffin knock against the churchyard gate going in?" "Faith, sir, Faith? What's that?" "Why, faith, sir, it's only a sort of exclamation, like, that's all, sir." Go on, go on." "I was about to say, sir, that art thou a silkworm? Dost thou spin thine own shroud out of thyself? Look to thy bosom, dispatch, and get these traps out of sight." He goes aft. That was a sudden now, but squalls come sudden in hot latitudes. I've heard the Isle of Albemarle, one of the Galapagos, is cut by the equator right in the middle. Seems to me some sort of equator cuts yon old man too, right in his middle. He's always under the line, fiery hot, I tell ye. He's always looking this way. Come, oakum, quick. Here we go. This wooden mallet is the cork, and I'm the professor of musical glasses. Tap, tap. Ahab, speaking to himself. There's a sight, there's a sound, the gray-headed woodpecker tapping the hollow tree. Blind and dumb might well be envied now. See, that thing rests on two line tubs full of tow lines. A most malicious wag, that fellow. Rat-tat, so a man's seconds tick. Oh, how immaterial are all the materials. What things real are there but imponderable thoughts? Here's now the very dreaded symbol of grim death by a mere hap, made expressive sign of the hope and hope of most endangered life. A life buoy of a coffin. Does it go further? Can it be that some spiritual sense a coffin is, after all, but an immortal preserver? I think of that, but no, so far gone am I in the dark side of the earth that this other side, the theoretic bright one, seems but an uncertain twilight to me. Will ye never have me, carpenter, with that accursed sound? I go below, let me not see that thing here when I return again. Now then, Pip, we'll talk this over. I do suck most wondrous philosophies from thee. Some unknown conduits from the unknown worlds must empty into thee. This is the end of chapter 127. So here we have the carpenter going about caulking the casket. And he's caulking it with something called oakum. Now, oakum is little bits of fiber derived from rope. So you go and you make the rope, and you take hemp or sisal or things like that. Basically plant matter, and you spin it. And so you spin all of the little strands together. And so what happens is it's just like braiding hair. So you braid one piece around another, and you have all of these little pieces wrapped around each other. And sometimes you slowly start adding pieces in down the line. So you start with 20 or 30 strands, and then you slowly add in 1 or 2 strands as you go along. Because the strands eventually run out. They're not all the same length. And so what happens is one runs out here, and another one gets added, and one runs out, and another one gets added. And so you have this rope, which is composed of all of these different fibers. Now, as you use the rope, as you lift loads, as you pull in whales, as you lash the sails together, as the rope gets used, these various little individual fibers break. And like we saw in the chapter with the log and the line, eventually the rope wears out to the point where it just snaps. So once the rope snaps, there's not really much you can do with it, because once it fails, that means that there's probably lots of other failure points along the way. So hopefully you look for it starting to fray in the middle, where it's signs of bits of it breaking. And once you start seeing the line being worn, you stop using it. Climbers, mountain climbers, are meticulous about how they prepare their mountaineering ropes, because they know their life depends on it. And the first sign of fraying, the first sign of wearing, they just, get rid of the rope. And these ropes are expensive, but hey, you only have one life. So anyway, the sailors have the rope, and these ropes are no longer useful as ropes. You can no longer use them to bail. You can't trust them to wrap things up, because they're going to fail sooner or later. And so what they do is they would pick them apart. And so you would have all of these little fibers, which are too short and too frayed to make a new rope out of. But they're great for caulking. Oh, plus, in the process of making a rope, as was mentioned back in an earlier chapter, they add a little tar, which kind of holds the rope together. So the rope isn't just the twisted fibers. Many marine ropes are actually tarred. So you have the rope, you have the tar, and they would pick these fibers out, and it's this sort of gunky mess called oakum, which is really great for plugging holes between planks. So you might find it actually in some old houses where they would have, 2 boards like this, and then you'd have this gap, and they just stuff in oakum or felt or various other things. And felt is much the same, except it hasn't been treated with the tar, and it's made out of wool instead of hemp. But much the same principle. It's little strands of fiber. So they would stuff the caulking into this string, stuff the oakum in as caulking. So here you have the carpenter. He's going through, he's patching this up. He's making this bump, bump, bump sound, because, you take a little bit, you put it there, you take a word's escaping me, the flat tool, and just pushes it in. Hit it with the hammer, get it nice in there tightly. Get another piece, pop, tap it in, pop, tap it in. So he's going through, he's caulking this, and Ahab is like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Starbuck told me to make the coffin into the..." And Ahab is like, "That is so wrong." And so here we have Ahab, who is in the depths of madness. And he's realizing that, pretty much the rest of the crew is maybe worse than he is. He's talking with Pip, who is convinced... Pip is convinced that he's dead, and that he was lost at sea, and that he's just sort of a walking zombie sort of thing. So you have Ahab, who isn't all there, and Pip, who isn't all there, talking to the carpenter. The carpenter's like, "I just do what I'm told." Because, that was a carpenter. That was a carpenter who was like, okay, he does his work, and he is his work, and he just does it. And, so that could be a happy life. And so the carpenter is like, here I am, I'm just a carpenter, I'm just doing what I'm told. And Ahab asks, "Do you sing while you do this?" And he's like, "No, I have the music from the hammer and the chisel," and they talk about sounding boards in the body. And he said that in the play, the gravedigger sings. Now, this, it's a reasonably common trope, whistling through the graveyard. But I think this might actually be another reference to Hamlet, where there's this great scene in Hamlet where Hamlet is coming home to Denmark and he stops by a graveyard and there's a gravedigger. And the gravedigger is digging a grave, and Hamlet and the gravedigger have this interchange that has very much the feeling of this interchange between Ahab and the carpenter. And so here you have this interchange between Hamlet and the gravedigger. And it's just kind of this weird sort of joking, but it's a hilarious scene in Hamlet, and the interaction between the carpenter and between the carpenter and Ahab is kind of funny because it's just sort of like joking, and it's like you're just an unprincipled jack of all trades. And it's like, oh, the hatchway is like the grave is right next to the coffin. It's all handy by it. It's like, so there's this really sort of funny camaraderie there, and Ahab is starting to realize he's not quite right, and perhaps that's the reference for the island in the Galapagos cut by the equator. So you have part of it in the north and part of it in the south, and all of it hot. So part of it in the north, part of it in the south could be Ahab partially sane, partially crazy, if you're going with a northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere thing. Or it could also just be because it's a tropical climate and it is always year-round hot, that Ahab is just continuously crazy. But we are coming down on the end here. Really, really close.